Hello and welcome everyone to the second class of the Secure Websites Masterclass. Today we are going to be learning all about SSL certificates. This is going to involve learning about the different kinds so you can figure out which one is going to be best for your website, for your personal needs. This is also going to be about purchasing and obtaining this certificate, as well as getting this set up and running on your website. So by the end of today's class, once you follow through these instructions, your website will actually be accessible using the HTTPS address. There will still be more to learn after this class though, before you can actually start presenting this secure website to the general public. However, today is kind of laying the groundwork for all that, getting these certificates set up, which is then necessary to actually be able to complete the later steps in this series. So as I mentioned, we're going to be learning about the different kinds of certificates. We're going to be learning about how to purchase these, and then we're going to talk about getting these actually set up and running on your website. So to begin with, I need to talk to you about the different kinds of certificates. This can actually be pretty confusing for somebody if they don't really know anything about SSL certificates. If they just go out and start looking at the different kinds that are available, it can be pretty unclear as far as what exactly you need, which of these would be useful in different kinds of situations. And so that is the goal here of the first part of this class, is to teach you about these different certificates and simply clear up this entire process for you. Now, ultimately, there are three main kinds of these SSL certificates. I am going to talk about more than just these three main types, because there are some other ones or other variations of these three types that you may commonly see on the marketplace or perhaps offered by your web host. So I feel like it is necessary to discuss all of them and not just the three main types. But the three main types are domain validation, organization validation, and extended validation. Now, ultimately, for domain validation, this is really the cheapest type of SSL certificate, at least the cheapest kind that you would really want to be utilizing on your website. However, while it can be tempting to get the cheapest type of certificate, this is something that's really only useful or recommended to be used for certain types of situations. If you wanted to secure, for example, the WordPress dashboard of a website, or maybe you were creating a Facebook app or something like that that required the use of an SSL certificate, this domain validation would certainly be okay for those types of purposes. This would also be okay for something simple like a content-based Amazon affiliate website. Ultimately, you don't want to be using domain validation certificates on commercial websites or really on any kind of site where you're going to be collecting personal information. With that said, this type of certificate, just like all of the others that I will discuss here today, will still provide the padlock in your web browser next to the website address, and this will allow your users to view your site as being trusted. It will still provide the secure connection. It will still provide the boost in search engine rankings for having a secured website. Now, another really big advantage to this is that you don't really have to go through any kind of special verification process to actually be able to obtain these. You can actually go and buy this certificate and get it issued and set up on your website in about 15 minutes or so. However, some people, and this is through no fault of your own if this does happen to you, but some people will end up encountering an additional delay with getting this type of certificate, or possibly even any of the other types. The authority that registers and issues these certificates will simply sometimes randomly select a certificate for additional verification, and this can cause it to take some extra time. But for most people, and in most cases, you should be able to go and purchase this and get it set up on your site pretty quickly. Now, the next kind of certificate is called organization validation. This gets more expensive than domain validation, but this is also not the most expensive kind of SSL certificate either. Ultimately, if your site's going to be collecting personal information, if you're going to be engaging in direct e-commerce sales on your website, the things that are really more important for having the SSL certificate, this is really the kind of certificate that you would want to be getting. This also still provides the padlock in the browser showing that your site is secure. When you click on the padlock, though, it's going to give more information about your company, like the name of your company, the address of the company, things of that nature. Now, ultimately, you can get this type of certificate under your personal name, or you can also do this under a legally registered company name. However, if you do not have a legally registered business, this is actually the best kind of certificate that you can get. You can't go down to the next level, the extended validation certificate, without having a legally registered business. So if you're going to be doing all this under your personal name, you really only have the choice between domain validation or organization validation. Now, compared to domain validation, one of the drawbacks with this organization validation certificate is simply that it's going to take more time. It does require a little bit of paperwork for you to prove your identity, for example, for you to prove the identity of your business or that you're the owner of the business. And so it typically takes a couple of business days to get one of these issued to you. Now, going up to the highest level of certificate is called an extended validation certificate. Again, with this type, you must have a legally registered business with the relevant government registration agency in your country or state. Depending on where you live, this could vary. And so once again, this is not something that you can obtain just running a website or running a business that is done under your own personal name. However, this is viewed as being the most trusted type of SSL certificate. And it's really only going to be necessary in situations where that trust, that extra validation would actually come in handy. If you're running a popular e-commerce business, if you're collecting sensitive personal information, and you have, a lot of traffic, a lot of people that are visiting your website, you will get the best results from having this extended validation certificate. However, like I mentioned before, you have to have a legally registered business. Your company name that you provide for this certificate must exactly match the legally registered name of your company. You also have to have a company phone number and address that you provide for the certificate, and these must match what is available in third-party public telephone listings too. Now, as far as getting approved and issued one of these extended validation certificates, it takes more as far as the verification process goes. It takes more time as well. You really need a business that is 3 years old or more for this type of certificate, or else there will be additional verification steps that are required for it, and this can simply extend the amount of time that it takes to get one. It doesn't mean that a brand new business can't obtain one of these certificates. It just means that you're going to have to go through more paperwork in order to be able to get one. Now, in addition to providing information for your business, you also have to provide a contact for your business that has the authority to be purchasing one of these certificates on behalf of the company. Now, even if you just go out and register a business name and you're the only person that works for that business, being, the owner or the CEO of that business, it is quite okay to provide yourself as the organization contact for purposes of this verification process. They'll reach out to you, contact you, they will ask you for various information to provide proof of the business, to provide proof that you are the owner of the business or that you are authorized to be making this purchase on behalf of the company. And ultimately, this whole process, in most cases, will take about 2 weeks. Now, one of the big differences between this type of certificate, the extended validation, and the other two types that I have mentioned already, you're still getting the padlock in the web browser, but you're also getting what is known as a green bar next to the padlock. I can show you one of these green bars here real quick. Right here, you can see not only is the padlock showing up, but it also shows the actual company name where they are located directly within the web browser here. This is only obtainable through one of these extended validation certificates. So again, this is kind of the most recognized sign of trust as far as website security is concerned. And this is why it's more important for a site that is heavily engaged in e-commerce, has a lot of traffic, is collecting a lot of personal information. So this really is something that is not necessary at all for a strictly content-based affiliate website, like if you're running an Amazon site. You don't need to worry about the additional cost, the additional verification procedures that you would have to go through in order to obtain one of these. I'm going to get back to showing you these different kinds of certificates, differences in their prices, how to go about obtaining these in just a few minutes. Before I jump to that though, I do want to mention a couple of other varieties of SSL certificates that you might see out there. There are a lot of web hosts. If you get shared website hosting, for example, that will offer you a free shared SSL certificate. However, these shared hosting certificates are not really intended to be used on a public website. They're actually more intended to be used to secure your connection to the back end of your website. And I'm not even just referring to the WordPress dashboard. I'm talking about the actual back end of your hosting account, things like your control panel, your email accounts. Ultimately, a shared hosting certificate is not going to be using your actual domain name. It's going to be using the domain name of the server that your website is listed on. That's why they can offer these free certificates for anybody that is hosting with their company, because it's not something that they're having to pay for every individual domain name that wants to be utilizing them. They pay for one certificate for each server that they have. And then ultimately, anybody that is using that server will be able to take advantage of this certificate. For the purposes of getting a boost to your website rankings in the Google search engine, however, this really is not going to do you a lot of good. You wouldn't be able to use your own domain name if you were trying to utilize this on your public website. You'd have to actually use your server's domain name instead. And so this isn't really ideal when it comes to trying to obtain traffic or good Google rankings. So while it is something that, these hosting companies will give you for free, they're often not really clear about what they are or what they can really be used for or what their limitations may be. So I just wanted to make sure that this was clear to you going forward, because this is something that's pretty commonly seen on shared website hosts. So ultimately, if you want to have the public pages of your website secured with an SSL certificate, you really need to be purchasing your own certificate. And it is quite okay if you go for, the cheap domain validation type of certificate if you have a non-commercial type of website, like just a purely content-based website. Because these other certificates will allow you to use your actual domain name for that secure connection. Otherwise, you won't be able to refer to your website as being on that domain. You'd have to use your server address again. And that's not really something that you would actually want to be doing. One other thing worth mentioning, if you are using a shared website hosting account where you don't have an entire server all to yourself, your account is on a server with a lot of other web hosting accounts that are owned by other people, you may need to look into whether your host requires a dedicated IP address for each of the SSL certificates that will be utilized on your account. There are some hosts that do not require this, but then there are other hosts that do require this. If you find that this is needed, it's as simple as contacting your web host to get a dedicated IP address for your website. Sometimes the host will provide a limited number, maybe one or two of them for free. Other times they will ask for an additional monthly charge to have this dedicated IP address. However, if they are charging you extra for it, it's usually going to be pretty cheap, maybe just a few extra dollars a month. One of the final kinds of certificates that I wanted to mention to you is referred to as multi-domain. This can be really tempting if you run a lot of different websites. If you're looking at possibly buying 10 or 20 different SSL certificates, you may initially think that a multi-domain certificate would be better for you and possibly cheaper for you. However, this can actually be a little misleading, and personally I prefer to use a separate SSL certificate for each of my websites. A big reason for this is actually the cost. While it may initially look like getting one multi-domain certificate to use on a bunch of different websites, the price that you would see these things being sold for seems like if you had numerous websites, once you top a certain number of websites, it seems like it would actually be cheaper to get this type of certificate. However, this again can be the part that is pretty misleading. With most of the other types of certificates, the domain validation, organization, or extended validation certificates, you're actually going to get to use one domain name on each of those certificates, but you'll get to use two different variations of that domain. So this would be your website address without the www included at the beginning of it, and then also the website address with the www included. With a multi-domain certificate, though, you're only going to get to use one of those for each of the domains that you're allowed to use on this certificate. So if you wanted to use the www address and the naked address for your domain name, this would actually take two domains applied to this multi-domain certificate to be able to accomplish this. This becomes important when it comes to the cost, because most of the multi-domain certificates that I have noticed start at having 3 domains that you would be able to add, but it's not 3 unique domains, since those 2 different addresses for most domain names will account for 2 of those 3 domains. So if you wanted to have 3 separate websites using one of these multi-domain certificates, you would actually need to have it to where you could use it on 6 domains and not 3, since each domain will typically take up 2 of those spots. I also mentioned that these typically start at 3 domains, and they can go upwards of 100 domains that you can put on a single certificate. However, the 3 domain initial limit is the base price that you're going to end up seeing on these certificates. And as you increase the number of domains that you would want to be able to use this for, the price then also increases. And once you compare this to the cost of just buying a single certificate for each of the websites, it almost always works out better in your favor to just buy a separate certificate for each of them. Now, I also mentioned earlier that I want to show you a little bit more about these different types as far as what they're used for, the cost that is associated with each of them. This also, though, kind of ties into my next subject, which is where you actually go to purchase these certificates. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter where you go and buy one of these certificates. They're available at tons of different websites on the internet. Most of your web hosting companies will also offer their own certificate that you can purchase directly through them. But no matter where you get the certificate, you can still use it on any web host. So if you have a hosting account with a company and they sell SSL certificates, you don't have to buy it directly through that company. You can buy the certificate wherever you want to, and then you can set up that certificate on your web host, no matter which one you're using. So with that said, while your choices are open, you're welcome to go and do some of your own research as far as where you would prefer to buy one. But it really, in most cases, comes down to cost, because the certificates that you're getting out there, they're basically all the same thing. A lot of the times when you're buying a certificate from one company as opposed to another company, the actual certificate that you are receiving is going to be the same. It, in most cases, will even be issued by the exact same company as well. So with that said, I personally prefer to use a company called SSLs.com, and this is going to be what I am going to be using for reference for this particular course. If you go to the homepage of SSLs.com, you can see further down the page all of the different types of certificates that are available. And they range in prices from $5 a year per website up to about $158 a year. This one, though, is actually a multi-domain certificate. So just for one single domain name, you're getting up to really about $79 a year to get one of the EV certificates. Do not let these prices mislead you, though. As I mentioned, there are a lot of different kinds. You can see just from scrolling through this page that, they have quite a few different options available to you. It looks like 13 different options available just from this one website. To help to narrow down the choices for you, they have a number of different options here for what you would want to be using this for: personal use, business use, e-commerce, one domain, multi-domain, subdomains. For most cases, though, if you're just setting up an Amazon website that's going to be strictly content-based, I recommend just clicking on the one domain. Even if you're going to be going for some type of a e-commerce site, this would still give you all of the different options that you may possibly need. So just for a single domain website, this narrows it down to 6 choices. So this makes it a little easier to choose from. And as you can see, they start at $5 a year and they go upwards of $79 a year. But these prices, as I mentioned earlier, can sometimes be a little misleading. This is actually the price for 3 years worth of service. So this $5 a year, to get this price at $5 a year, you have to pay for 3 years up front. So this is actually $15 to get this set up, but it would last for 3 years. If you only wanted to do 1 year on this particular certificate, it actually changes the price of it. You can see when you're selecting the number of years here, if I change it down to 1 year, the price actually goes up to $9 a year. 2 years, it drops a little bit more to $7 a year. And then 3 years, it's dropping down to $5 a year. So when you compare the $15 for 3 years to $9 for 1 year, you're obviously a lot better off just going for the 3-year certificate, unless there is a really good reason why you would only want to have this certificate for a year. You will in the long run be better off going for the full 3 years. It's also a little bit of a pain having to deal with renewing these things all the time. It's not really something that you want to have to do every single year, because it does take a little bit of time and effort when these things expire. You basically have to kind of start over if you let these things lapse and don't renew them before they actually expire. You have to buy a whole brand new certificate. You have to go back through the entire process of getting it issued to you and getting this set up on your site. Plus, with the 3-year, you're actually getting at the 1-year price, you're getting it cheaper than 2 years at the 1-year price. So you're $15 for 3 years, you're $9 for 1 year. If you just renewed this one time and got it for 2 years, your cost at $9 a year would already be up to $18, which is obviously less than what they'll charge you for a full 3 years if you go ahead and buy it up front. At the 2-year price, you're really only getting a slight discount. You pay about $1 less for 2 years than you would for 3 years up front. So again, it's just a matter of cost. What is easiest to actually do to be able to, get this set up and running on your site, and for it to be something that you don't have to really worry about for, every single year. You can just purchase this and you won't have to worry about this thing until 3 years later once you get this set up. Now on each of these individual pages for the different kinds of certificates, they'll give you some information about what's required or included with each different type of certificate. The easier ones, the domain validation ones, aren't going to require any kind of paperwork. The organization or extended validation certificates will all require some type of paperwork to go along with them. All of the single domain name ones, they're both going to include the naked site address, so like site.com or www.site.com. And most of them are going to say no green bar in the browser here. Again, the green bar is something that you can only achieve from getting the most expensive extended validation certificate. And again, you do need a legally registered business or company name to be able to obtain that type of certificate. So for the average user that's just running a content-based Amazon website, for example, not only is the green bar not necessary, but you probably don't even have a legally registered business to be able to obtain that type of certificate. If you are getting involved in e-commerce, and that's the reason why you want this certificate, you might be able to start with the organization validation certificate at first. If your site starts getting popular and you're making a decent amount of money every month, register a legal business name and get the extended validation certificate. But until you can really justify that extra cost and have a legitimate reason to be using the more expensive certificate, it's really just overkill and not something that you need to worry about. I also like this main overview of the different kinds of certificates that are available to you, because it gives you kind of a grading scale in terms of how much assurance these certificates are really offering your website visitors. The cheapest type of certificate that I've been pointing out to you here says it's only providing low assurance. You go up in price level and you could get one that's providing medium assurance. You go up even more, you're getting high assurance. And then the green bar offers very high assurance. This is really just a level of trust. It's a level of how much verification you're going to really have to go through to be able to get these certificates issued to you. But again, don't feel like you have to have something that is high or very high assurance for every single website that you decide to run. It's really more based on whether that trust factor is really needed for your website visitors. And again, you really only need that additional trust factor if you're going to be collecting some kind of personal information, if you're going to be engaging in direct e-commerce sales on your site. In some cases, maybe if you're going to have them logging into a members area of your website, you might want a little bit of additional assurance, just kind of depending on whether any sensitive information is included, their names, their email addresses, their home addresses, phone numbers. require a little bit of additional assurance that that information would be secure. When you get up into collecting payment information, credit card numbers, and things like that, you would almost definitely want to have high or even very high assurance for those types of purposes. Now, the three different types of certificates that I mentioned to you are all included here within these six. If you look at the validation line here, you can see this one is domain validation. This one is also domain validation. All three at the bottom are organization validation certificates, and then this one, the EV, the extended validation, offers the green bar with your company name. With that said, though, there's a bit of a drastic price difference in some of these where they're ultimately kind of still providing you the same thing. The two domain validation certificates, the one that I showed you already that's only $5 a year, and then this one that is also domain validation, this one jumps up 5 times the price. And one of the only main differences here is that it's offering some additional assurance. But again, this is the 3-year price. So to be able to get this certificate at 3 years, you're looking at spending $75 as opposed to only spending $15. If you only wanted 1 year, it's not as drastic of a price difference as it is with the previous certificate. They're obviously on that other certificate, they're kind of pushing for you to be registering it for 3 years at a time. But with the higher price tag, it's a little more understandable that, a lot of people may balk at shelling out $75, even if it is only, or even if it is going to be for a full 3 years. $29 just for your first year. And even once you keep renewing this, you're only looking at spending maybe $10 extra or something over the course of those 3 years if you do it on a yearly subscription instead of a 3-year subscription. One of the things having to do with the extra cost here is that this one, while I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for the purpose, if you are going to be collecting some kind of personal information, if you are going to be engaging in e-commerce, but maybe you're just getting started, you don't want to shell out a lot of money to begin with, this can be the more feasible route to go for a brand new e-commerce site, for example. It gives some additional assurance in terms of verifying that your business actually exists, whereas the other certificate, the cheapest one, they're really doing very, very minimal checks to ensure that you are who you say you are, that your business actually exists, things of that nature. So this is why you're getting that medium level of assurance with this slightly more expensive certificate, as opposed to the really cheap one where you're getting a low level of assurance to go with it. But again, this may not really make a big difference for you if you're just doing a content-based website and you're not going to be collecting any kind of personal information. It's completely okay to go for the low assurance, the really cheap domain validation certificate. I actually use this particular certificate with the content-based sites that I've set up SSL on, and it works just fine. So again, this one would really be more useful if you're just getting started. You don't want to have really high investment costs to start up something like an e-commerce site. Once you're running for a little while though, and you have some sales built up under your name, and you could afford to start shelling out a little bit more, consider going for one of the more expensive organization validation certificates. And then if you start generating a pretty heavy amount of sales, consider legally registering your company name and upgrading to the extended validation certificate. With organization validation, though, for just a little bit more than you would pay for this certificate here, offering the medium assurance, for just $3 more a year, you can get the organization validation certificate through this particular option. And, again, the cost is pretty comparable. Your yearly cost is going to go up more. It's, I believe, about $9 more a year for just the 1 year option. But when you're going for the 3 year option, it's just an extra $3 a year to get this particular type of certificate. The biggest difference here, though, is to get that higher level of assurance, it's going to require paperwork. With any of the organization validation certificates, you're going to see that it requires paperwork. This is also true with the extended validation certificates. So it's just simply going to take more time and more effort to actually get these issued to you. But again, it provides a higher level of trust to your visitors. Anytime you see this padlock up here in a web browser, you can click on it, see that you're on a secure connection, and you can click on the arrow here to see additional information about this company or this website. So I can see here that this Namecheap Incorporated that's located in the US, I can see that this site is indeed owned by Namecheap Incorporated. They're located in Phoenix, Arizona, and that this was verified by a company called Comodo. This is actually one of the companies that issues these SSL certificates. There are some other ones, but one of the other major ones besides Comodo is VeriSign. I find that VeriSign certificates are good, but they're usually more expensive than the Comodo ones. And ultimately, you're still pretty much getting the same thing out of it. You can even view more information as far as viewing the actual certificate. You can see technical information as far as how much encryption is taking place. But for the average user, they're not really going to dive this deep into checking out your certificate. But for people that are very aware of these SSL certificates and what they mean for a website, what they might mean for providing their personal information to these websites, some people will dive deeper and actually want to look into your certificate to make sure that you are basically who you say you are. And that's what all of this verification and paperwork is really about. It's just some extra assurance for people to know that, you are indeed this company, or that you are indeed the person that you say you are, that you're the owner of this business. Now, I also mentioned to you the extra time that is involved. Either of these two certificates that has the domain validation, you can purchase these and get these set up on your website pretty quickly. Any of the organization validation certificates down here at the bottom, these will take a couple of business days. Through SSLs.com, I believe it's 2 business days to get these issued to you in most cases. And then the highest level, the extended validation, this one is going to take about 2 weeks to get issued to you. So as you move up with the additional wait time, you're also talking about a more involved process, more information that they're going to need from you in terms of being able to verify that you are and your business is, who you are saying that you are. So once you have gone through and actually purchased one of these SSL certificates. The next thing you need to do is to actually get this set up and running on your website. To do this, it takes a few different steps. It can be a little bit confusing at a first glance, but ultimately, once you kind of learn this whole process, is actually pretty simple and straightforward. You're just generating a number of different certificates or encryption keys that are going to be utilized for your certificate. You then take this information from your web hosting account that you generate, and you enter it into your actual certificate that you have purchased, and this completes your certificate so you can actually download it. Then you can go back to your web host and upload this certificate and finally get it installed. So with that said, I want to walk you through this entire process. This starts with generating a private key. The private key and also the CSR, these two things are both generated on your actual website. So what you want to do is go to the control panel for your website to be able to accomplish these two items. Look for the security section within control panel, and then look for the SSL/TLS link and icon. By clicking on this, you'll see the area for private keys. You will also see the area for the CSR, which is a certificate signing request. And so these two text links here are where you go to generate these. And then we will actually be coming back here once we have our completed and issued certificate. This is where we would then upload the certificate. And once we have all this on our server, then we can actually get this certificate installed through this final link. So we're just going to work our way down this list of items here one by one. And by the time we get to the bottom, our certificate will be set up and all ready to go. So for the private key, this is actually pretty simple, requires basically no information at all. You have a key size, which is already set to the recommended level, and then you have a description, which is not even necessary. I usually just like to put in the domain name or some kind of a reference to the domain name that I would be using, because these descriptions will show up above here in terms of just giving you some visual reference. If you're only going to have one site on a shared hosting account, for example, that's going to be utilizing this SSL certificate or any other SSL certificates on the same account, it may not be necessary to even bother with the description. But if you have one shared account and you're going to be setting up 5 or 10 different SSL certificates, it can simply be useful to provide these descriptions whenever you're prompted for them. So all you have to do here is enter in an optional description and click on the generate button. Now this provides you with your encoded private key. This entire text box right here is your encoded private key. However, you actually don't really need to worry about having this key. The only reason you would need to copy this key here is if you're going to be using this on another server besides the one that you're actually working on right now. For most people, that's not even going to be relevant. So all I needed to worry about there was just generating the key itself. So the next step is going to involve the certificate signing request. We click on the link here to get to generating this certificate signing request. We have the key, where we can select the key that we have just generated. And what this is it's basically an encryption key that tells your signing request, that tells your SSL certificate how to actually go about encrypting the information that's going to be sent. So this is unique information that's being generated by your server. That way, without this type of information, if you were just able to directly use an SSL certificate and it was going to be encrypting everything for you without these keys and stuff, it would be pretty easy for a hacker to intercept that information and to easily be able to decode it. So this is really what is giving the true security to your website, because these keys, these certificate signing requests are unique. That's something that's not going to be repeated amongst any other SSL certificates on the entire internet. So once you have your key selected, then you just provide the information for the website that you're going to be utilizing your certificate on. So under domains here, you just want to type in the domain name itself. Do this using the naked address where you're not using the www at the beginning of your domain name. So to set this up on my site, Down Comforter Guide, which is one of my content-based Amazon sites, I would simply type in that base domain name, downcomforterguide.com. In addition to the domain, there are a number of other fields here that you're going to have to provide. And you can see that some of them are starred as being required, but there are a couple of them, like company division, for example, and email, that are not actually starred. I do recommend, whether they're starred or not, to provide some kind of information in every single one of these text boxes. I also recommend to make a habit of providing the information that's going to match your actual domain name registration. If for some reason you forget what you registered your domain name under, the name, the address and stuff that you have entered, go to Google, type in whoisdomain, search for this term, and you can pretty much use any of the options that pop up. You just enter in your domain name and look it up. Most of these do require CAPTCHA to ensure that people aren't trying to harvest your data, basically. And then you'll be provided with the information that you used to register that domain name. So I can see the city, I can see the email address that I've used, the phone number, anything else that goes along with this domain name just to verify. So I can see that I have registered this one under Greenville, under the state of South Carolina. However, actually started making a mistake there myself. You don't want to use abbreviations. If you live in the USA, for your state, don't just put the two-letter abbreviation, write out the entire state name. Country, they help to ensure that you're not going to make a mistake here and use an improper abbreviation by providing all these abbreviations themselves. So you just have to find the relevant country that you live in and have registered this domain name in. So now this brings us down to company. If you were trying to go for organization validation or extended validation, and you have a legally registered business that you want this certificate to be registered under, that legally registered name is what you would be putting into this company box. However, if you're just registering this under your own personal name, if you're just using the domain validation certificate, you would also likely be registering this under your own personal name. You can still use a legally registered business for domain validation certificates, though. But most people that are buying the cheaper ones, they usually don't even have a legally registered business. So I would just type my name in here. So this is ultimately the legally registered name that I use for my business. I run my business under a sole proprietorship and do not actually have a legally registered business name to use for something like this. So I just use my own personal name, and this is quite okay to do. Now, company division, this part, you can see it's not a required field. And most people, when they read through this, they're going to feel like it probably doesn't apply to them, especially if you're running under your own personal name and not an actual company. You're not going to have a company division like a big corporation might have, for example. So instead of leaving this blank, I highly recommend to just use the letters NA for not applicable. Otherwise, there are some SSL certificate registration authorities or businesses that you would buy these certificates through where they may actually decline your certificate if you have left anything blank, even if it's not something that really applies to you, like the company division. So I just put in NA here, specifying that I do not have a company division that this applies to, and this is completely acceptable. The next thing you want to do is provide an email address where you can be contacted for verification of the domain ownership. If possible, this could be an email address using your actual domain name. So if I had an email address set up like ryan@downcomforterguide.com, and especially if that's the address that I use to register this domain name for or under, that is what I would want to put here. Typically though, I don't usually go through the email verification for domain ownership. I do this another way, which is actually just uploading a file to my website. And so I find it better and preferable for me at least to just enter in the name, the email address that I have registered the domain name owners. You can see here, this is the email that I have registered this particular domain name under. So I'll just provide that email address in under this field here. Now the passphrase part, you probably have a normal password that you like to use for logging into email, for logging into various online accounts that you have. Do not use that password for this particular passphrase field. This is not always required for all of the different types and all of the different registration authorities for SSL certificates. But just to be on the safe side, to ensure that your certificate does not get rejected because you're missing a required field that they need, I recommend to just go ahead and put in any kind of a passphrase. It's important though to realize, and this is the reason why you don't want to be using a normal password of yours that you would use anywhere else. The reason is because these passphrases are stored in this certificate signing request, and it's not even encrypted at that. So people can actually obtain this passphrase that you would be using. So that's the biggest reason why you don't want to be using something that could possibly be used to, break into one of your other internet accounts. Finally, we get down to the description. This again is not really necessary. It's just for your own personal reference. you can see up here after you have generated a certificate signing request, it'll give you the domain, the date that you set this up, and then it will show you the description. So if you feel there is a need for providing some kind of extra description on there for identification purposes, you can certainly put one, but you don't necessarily have to put anything in this field. This is kind of the one field where you may not have to worry about it, where you could potentially leave it blank, and it's not going to really affect this certificate getting issued to you. So once you have filled out everything here and you don't have any blank fields, possibly with the exception of the description field, just click on the generate button down below, and then you're going to be provided with your certificate signing request. So up here in this top box, this is the encoded certificate signing request. Select this from beginning to end, even include the little tag that's up at the top and the bottom of it. So select this entire text box and just copy all of this to your clipboard. This is something that we're going to be then using in the next step here. The next step, though, is not to actually do something through Control Panel. If I go back to the SSL TLS page, you can see that the next thing in our list here is certificates, where we will upload the certificate to our server. Well, we don't have our certificate yet. So there is a step in between these two, and this takes place off of your actual web server. So what you want to do for this next step to complete your SSL certificate is look for your email that you received when you purchased your SSL certificate. If you got this from SSLs.com, the subject of this email should read just like you see on my screen here, SSLs.com, order has been completed. This gives you an email just letting you know that your order was completed. But the real reason you want this is just for this one little link that is in it, and this will take you directly to the place that you need to go to complete your certificate. This is to go to mySSLs.com section of your account on this website. And just clicking on this link will take you directly to that page that you need. So then you'll have the certificates listed that you purchased, and all you have to do to enter into either of them is just click on the certificate number to start proceeding with it. This will take you to a page like you see here, and you want to look for the Start Activation button. Click on this button, and you are prompted to enter in your CSR. This is the information that we copied off of this step. So I just want to right-click and paste into this section here. So now I have my certificate signing request entered into this text box, and then I can just click on the button to read my CSR. So then you have a couple of additional steps to go through, depending on what kind of certificate you're purchasing. This is kind of the extra verification steps that are necessary. So you'll be prompted for various types of information depending on what you have purchased. For the domain validation, the simple, cheaper certificates that they offer, it'll be just like you're seeing here on my screen. The first thing you need to do is to specify what kind of a web server you're using. Most web servers are using something called Apache. If you're using a cPanel, this is an actual software brand of website administration systems. If you're using cPanel, then you are on Apache. If you're not quite sure, You can always contact your web host to find out if you are on an Apache server or if you are on a Windows server. But Windows, even though it might be common for personal computers, is actually nowhere near as common to be used on web servers. Apache is the most common one. So that's why this is automatically selected. But it's still worth pointing this out because it's possible that at least some people watching this might actually be using a Windows server or some different type of server. So once you have the proper server type selected, you click on the button down below. You can also verify that the information that you have provided in is accurate here, kind of double checking on this information before you proceed to the next step. So once we're satisfied, we move on. This tells us the domain names that this certificate is going to cover. So you can see, even though I only entered in the base domain name for this website, I still have the www version being covered under this SSL certificate. So it kind of does this automatically because I never provided this version of the domain name when I was setting all this up. So verify once again that this is what you want to use it for, and then you move on to the next step. So this is for the domain validation certificate. This is one of the few things that you actually have to worry about doing, and this is to confirm that you do indeed own this domain name. So basically what happens here is you have two choices. You can either get a file that you would then upload to your server, to your public website, and this file can then be accessed by the authority that is going to be issuing your certificate. And this verifies that you're the owner of that domain name. You could also choose to receive an email instead. Either one of these is quite okay to do. But since the receiving an email one is pretty straightforward, I wanted to demonstrate uploading a file. I usually end up going for the uploading a file option just because uploading a file on my website is really not something that presents any kind of an issue for me. So I'm going to choose this one, but before I proceed, it's very important to point something out here. Notice the directory that it is telling me to upload this to. Go ahead and copy this directory if you are going to be using this uploading a file method. Put it into a notepad file so you can make reference to this a little bit later on. So now I'm going to go ahead and proceed. The next step here is to simply enter in some company contact information. This contact information, again, is something that you would want to have directly matching whatever you have registered this domain name under. So I'll take my phone number and provide it in here. Select your country code, put in your name, your zip code that you have registered this under, and obviously your mailing address as well. So once you've provided all of this information in, the NA down here at the bottom, this is actually the company division that I provided NA for. So you can see that it's obtained some of this information off of my certificate signing request, and the rest of it I need to actually fill out myself. So once you proceed on through all of these different steps, you're going to get this file that you need to upload to your website. I go into the control panel and go to File Manager to be able to accomplish this. Go to the public HTML directory, and in a lot of cases at least, this would be the location where you would want to then start uploading this file, but it needs to be in these directories. And these directories are not going to exist already in most cases. If you're on a shared website hosting account though, you're going to have something like what you see here for all of the domain names except for the main one that you used for this particular website. So on this shared hosting account that I'm using, I have a main domain name, but then downcomforterguide.com is an add-on domain that I have attached to this shared hosting account. So to upload this file to the Down Comforter Guide website, I actually need to go into the Down Comforter Guide folder, and this takes me to the base directory of that website. So whatever website you're setting up your SSL certificate on, you need to navigate to the public base directory for that particular website. Now you can see that I've actually already uploaded and set up this directory and uploaded the file. So I have two directories here, and then this is the file that I was provided with through activating everything. I've basically tried to issue this certificate twice for the same domain name, so it's not actually letting me proceed through this process. But after I continue beyond here, it's going to allow me to download this text file that I then need to upload to my site for verification. So all I have to really do is to create these directories. In between the forward slashes are the directory names. One is called well-known with, and this is important, with a period in front of the directory name. And then within that directory is another directory called PKI validation. So just to show you how this is done, I'm going to go to the base website of this domain name where I do not actually have this kind of directory set up already. I'm going to click on plus folder up here, and I'm going to type in period well-known and click on create new folder. Now you can see on mine that the folder has automatically appeared for me. But if you have never really messed with File Manager before, or tried to mess with a file or a directory that has a period in front of it, it's quite possible that you won't see anything at all. It'll look like this. It'll look like you never even created that directory. What's going on though is any file or any folder with a period in front of the name is actually hidden from being viewed typically. So if you create that folder and then you do not see it appear on your screen, go up here to the settings button, click on show hidden files. This is known as a dot file. Click on save, and then you will be able to see that directory that you've just created. So now I can go within this directory and set up the next directory, PKI validation. So I repeat the same process yet again, using the new directory name. This one is not a dot file though. That is also very important. These need to match exactly with the structure that they provide you with. So then within this folder, this is where I would then want to go and upload that text file that I was provided with. So on my domain that I'm actually utilizing this certificate for, you can see within those directories, this is where I have uploaded this text file. And this is just simply a text file that the company issuing my SSL certificate can go to and verify that I own this particular domain, because you can't really upload a file on a domain, at least not very easily, without, trying to hack into a website or something. You wouldn't be able to upload a file to a very specific directory of a website unless you are actually the owner or have access to that website. So this is how they validate your domain name before issuing the certificate for you. So once you have generated this certificate, there are two different ways that you can kind of go about accomplishing what you need to do at this point. One is to simply download the certificate by clicking on the certificate itself and then going up to the download link. Now this is going to download not just the individual certificate, it's going to download an actual zip file to your computer. Now this zip file actually contains 3 different files located within it. One is called a P7B file, another one is called a CRT file, and then another one is called a CA bundle file. The CRT file is the actual certificate that you are going to need. However, it's worth pointing out, and personally I find this a little bit easier to do, if you have just gone through the process of setting up and activating this certificate, you will usually be shown the actual encoded certificate, and you may not even have to bother with going through this download process and pulling out this CRT file. So ultimately what I need to be doing is I need to put this CRT file on my website. This can either be done by uploading this file, or it can be done by copying the encoded information that the website here provides for you. Now this is all done back on our website host. So this is where we would then go back to the cPanel. We go back to SSL and TLS. We then go to the certificates section. And if you have the encoded certificate text that you copied, you can paste that into this box, provide a description, and save your certificate. Otherwise, you go down here to this Browse button and you select that CRT file. Now, if it's a part of this zip file here, you're going to need to extract this particular file to your local computer first to be able to do this. Now, again, I've already actually uploaded this particular certificate, so it's not something that I would want to be uploading onto it twice. But either pasting the certificate text into the box or browsing for that CRT file that came out of the zip file that you downloaded. Either one of these options will put this certificate onto your web server. The only thing you really have left to do after that, once you have this certificate on your server, is to install it. So we go back to SSL and TLS. We go down to install and manage SSL. And then we are just selecting the domain name. So I would select downcomforterguy.com here. I click on autofill by domain, and then it's going to automatically populate all of the information. This is the encoded CRT file. So if I had just been pasting this information onto that previous screen that I was showing you, this would have been the text that I would have been pasting there. Otherwise, I would have just uploaded that CRT file. So now this is just pulling everything for you. It's pulling the CRT file, it's pulling the private key, and it's actually pulling that CA bundle file for you as well, but you don't have to upload that CA bundle file. This is held on another website, on the site where your SSL certificate has been issued from. They have these CA bundle files, and so this autofill process fetches that file for you based on your key, based on your actual certificate. So as long as all three of these boxes are populated correctly, then all you have to do is go down and click on Install Certificate. And this will then set up the certificate for this domain name on your web server. So once this whole process has been accomplished, you'll still be able to visit your website as normal, not using the HTTPS address. But you would now be able to start visiting your website using the HTTPS address. However, it is worth pointing out that at this point, in most cases at least, your website is not actually going to be secure yet. It is connecting through a secure connection, but steps that we are going to be taking in the later classes of this series will help to make the site itself actually secure. You can see the padlock up here that I now have on this site, but there's a little warning symbol next to it, and it's saying that my connection is not secure, but it tells me why it's not secure. Parts of this page are not secure, such as images. And again, this is some of the stuff that we are going to be taking care of in the later lessons of this series. So the reason for that is, even though this connection is secure, that I'm accessing the site through this secure address, if my site is pulling in media from any non-secure website address, this could be images, it could be things that you don't even necessarily see on the website, like CSS files or JavaScript files that are needed for the public website to operate. If any of those are referenced using HTTP and not HTTPS, then it's going to come back as being not secure. So just for example, if I go to this image here and I copy the location of my image, I'm just going to paste it into the browser so you can see what I'm referring to. This image is being accessed through HTTP and not through HTTPS. So that's why the website itself is not actually secure yet. All three of these images are being accessed insecurely. The same is true for this image further down the page. And then even beyond that, there's even more aspects to this. Diving into some of the code for the site, if I look for JavaScript or CSS files, there may possibly even be some of these things on the site that are not being accessed securely. it looks like on this particular site, like that may not actually be the case. I can see the CSS files here, the JavaScript files. They are all being accessed using HTTPS. So this part actually looks like it's checking out okay on my site. The part I'm really going to have to worry about to get this connection to truly be secure, it looks like is mostly just going to be the images that are on the site. So again, this is something that we will be diving into in the next two classes as far as wrapping up all these loose ends and then also making it to where people can't access my site insecurely. What I mean by that is at some point, once I have completed everything on my site to where when I visit the site using HTTPS, to where it actually shows up as being a secure website, if people try to go to my site using the non-secure address, I don't want it to allow them to do that. I want it to automatically, if somebody were to just type in my domain name or to follow a link to my domain name, I want it to automatically send them to the secure version of my site. And again, this is something that we will be addressing and I will be teaching you how to accomplish in the next two lessons of this series. Now, I also mentioned as part of this class that there are more ways to kind of go about setting up your SSL certificate. Most websites are going to have access to something like this cPanel. Whether you are using a shared website host, whether you're using a virtual host like a VPS, or whether you're even using a dedicated server, you're still going to have access to cPanel or possibly to some other backend software that allows you to manage your website. And so you could potentially use the same method that I've shown you today, the SSL and TLS page here under cPanel. You could use this for pretty much any kind of a website for any type of website host that you might be utilizing. But I thought it would be worth pointing out, at least, for people that do have a dedicated server, that there is another way to go about setting this up. And this is to actually use the backend system for a dedicated web server. This is called WHM. And this is management for not just one hosting account, but for an entire server full of hosting accounts. Using WHM, the whole process is pretty much the same, but it just looks a little different, and it's found on obviously different pages because you're not going through the control panel. Again, though, on a dedicated server environment, you could still use the control panel on an individual website to be able to set up these SSL certificates. If you were trying to set this up on a bunch of different websites all at once, it could be, a little annoying having to log into 5, 10, 50, or 100 different sites one at a time, going through the control panel to do all of this. So using the WHM panel is a way that you can kind of bypass that control panel, and you can do everything for all the different sites on the entire server using just this one page. So in the left-hand sidebar, you also have a section called SSL and TLS. And you basically have two sections of this page that you would want to pay attention to. One is to generate an SSL certificate and signing request, and the other one is to install the SSL certificate. So you start off on this first page, the generate page. On the generate page, you're still basically doing the same thing that I walked you through with the control panel, except the private key and the certificate signing request steps are all included on this one page. The private key options up at the top here, and then the certificate information. And this, again, works just like it was on the cPanel. We still provide the domain name as normal. We still provide the city, the state, the country, the company name, the company division, the email, and the password. And then we generate that CSR. So this generate step here, it's generating both the private key and the CSR all at one time. So then after we do this, it's going to provide us with our encoded CSR, which we would then take back to the page for the SSL company, where we paste in that CSR and then provide other information to verify that site. This would then allow us to obtain the actual SSL certificate. And then we come back to WHM once we have that certificate. We go to the install page. We type in domain. We paste in the different aspects. You can also have this kind of automatically discover this information for you, just like with the other system. To where we type in domain, it'll kind of auto discover and pull all of this information for you. It can also be manually entered in, where you paste in your private key, you paste in your certificate code and your certificate authority bundle, and then you install it on the site. So it kind of takes the 4 different steps from the control panel's SSL TLS page, and you're accomplishing both of these 2 steps in that first step on WHM, and then you're accomplishing these last 2 steps on the second page that I showed you in the WHM. So it kind of just simplifies and streamlines the entire process, but it all still works the exact same way. You're still doing each of these individual things. You still pause right in the middle here and go and enter in this CSR with the company that you purchased your SSL certificate through, before you then proceed with uploading and installing your certificate on your website. So the vast majority of people watching this particular series will most likely not have to deal with WHM. It is something that can become rather complicated. Even if you are running your own dedicated server for a variety of different websites of yours and not using shared hosting, you'd still have access to this cPanel. So it can always be done through this same cPanel page, pretty much no matter what kind of website hosting environment you might be located on. So again, we went through these 5 steps here. I demonstrated these to you through cPanel, also pointed out how this would work on a dedicated server as well, to generate our private key, to generate our certificate signing request. Then we go to the company where we purchased our certificate to complete that certificate and to have it issued to us. Then we upload our certificate, and finally we install our certificate. And by doing all this, then we can start accessing the site using the HTTP address. And as I also mentioned earlier, that does not make your entire website secure yet. It gives you the secure connection, but you still have other aspects of your site that will end up needing to be adjusted to truly make it secure. If you are building a brand new website, you might not have to worry about going back through and changing the address of images that are on your site because you wouldn't have anything loaded up there yet. But for doing this process on existing websites of yours, it will be necessary to take some of the steps that I'll be teaching you in the next 2 lessons of this series before you actually start forcing all of your traffic to view your website using the HTTPS address. So this just simply enables that HTTPS address, but we have not done anything yet to force that address upon people, to force the address upon Google and other search engines to where they are accessing the site securely. So it will take the additional work before this entire process is completed and our site is truly running on that secure connection for everybody. But this lays the groundwork for it. This enables that secure connection so we can then proceed on with taking care of the other aspects of it. So now I'd like to go ahead and open up to open Q&A. If you do have any questions you would like to ask me having to do with this class, having to do with buying an SSL certificate, getting this set up on your website, I welcome those questions at this time. Just simply enter in your question into the chat box and I will be happy to answer them for you.